Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. We're going to go ahead and get started since we're at right about 1:15. So welcome to the latest installment of the AOS Student Affairs Committee webinar series. Today, we're really excited to have some great panelists who will talk with us about what life is like as a postdoctoral researcher. So before we get started, the members of the webinar series subcommittee will all introduce ourselves. So my name's Kristen Rosamond, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Missouri St. Louis in the biology department. So now, Stephanie, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Gaspar. I'm a master's student at the University of Central Florida in the PHTAC Genomics Lab, and so glad to have you here today.
Thank you, Stephanie. So before we introduce our panelists, I do have a few announcements that we'd like to share from the AOS. So our first announcement is that student research grant applications are due on the 31st of January. So these are open to graduate students and undergraduate students, so please do consider applying. Next up, we have another deadline on January 31st, and this one is for AOS Kessel Fellowship applications. So these are tailored for early career researchers. So again, please consider applying for that. Next up, we're starting to have some deadlines for the 2025 AOS meeting. So it will take place in St. Louis, Missouri from August 11th through 15th, I believe, this year. So the deadline for submitting symposia, roundtables, and workshop proposals will also be on the 31st of January. Another deadline on the 31st of January, once again, is caregiver and travel grant applications for the conference. And also, if you're interested in presenting at the conference, the submission for abstracts and for both oral presentations and posters is now open, and that will close on March 16th. And finally, something we're really excited about is that the Student Affairs Committee is starting a new seminar series. So the goal of this series is to give weekly seminars that give student awardees from AOS research grants the chance to talk about their research. So this series will be led by Robert Driver, who's one of our panelists today. And if you're able to, please do tune in to the first of these presentations, which will take place on January 27th. And you can find the details for all of the upcoming seminars as well as registration links on the AOS website. So these are all of our announcements for today. So we'll now take a second to introduce all of our panelists. So you can just let us know your name, what institution you're at currently, and sort of what your postdoc journey has looked like, if you're a current postdoc, if you did one in the past, that sort of thing. So we can start with Brandon.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brandon. Currently, I'm a bioinformatics programmer in a clinical trials environment, but I did a postdoc at the University of Pittsburgh where we studied the chytrid fungus and how it influenced amphibians and why different species responded differently to the fungus itself. And prior to that, studied birds, looking at their diets and their development. So I'm still a bird guy.
Thanks, Brandon. Next, Kirsty.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kirsty Gurney. I'm currently a research scientist with Environment and Climate Change Canada and adjunct professor at the Department of Biology in the University of Saskatchewan. I did a postdoc at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I was there for about 3 years studying effects of climate change on the Arctic coastal plain.
Thank you. And next up, Robert.
Yes, thanks, Kristen, and thanks everybody for being here. I'm Robert. I am a postdoc. I'm coming up on almost 2 years as a postdoc at Duke University. Um, I have an NSF postdoc, PRFB, so if anyone has questions about that, you can let me know. And I study the sense of smell in birds, how birds smell. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. So we're going to get started with the first portion of our webinar, which will include asking the panelists some of the really great pre-submitted questions that we got from audience members when you registered. So after that, there will be a chance to ask live questions. So we'll be opening up the floor to live questions after we go through some of the pre-submitted ones. So we can get started. Our first pre-submitted question is, what factors did you consider when deciding which postdoc position to apply for? Was it primarily about the research topic, location, or other things like funding or your mentor's reputation?
I suppose I can start. So for me, studying birds during my PhD, I was really interested in freshwater environments. So I wanted to make sure that I had something that was similar to what I'd done before. So using DNA-based methods to understand perturbances of some species, but then also enough differences to hopefully make me a little more marketable in the future. I kind of felt like if I did the same thing from start to finish through my PhD, through my postdoc, it may not give me the sort of experience I needed for the next step. So I wanted to have enough similarities, but enough differences so I can still grow.
Yeah, I would just echo that and say that I was specifically interested in something that was a little bit different than what I had done before, specifically a new ecosystem and some new geography. So location did play into it a little bit for me. But to be totally honest, funding was also a component that I did consider, coming out of the PhD. It's definitely funding was part of it.
Yeah, I think of those variables listed, what was it primarily? Yeah, it was a little, sorry, you guys can't see the sheet maybe. So research topic, location, funding, or mentor's reputation, a little bit of all that went into it, but I think it started with the research topic. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thanks for your insight on that. Our next question is, how do you obtain a postdoc outside of academia? So this may just apply to some of our panelists. I also know some of our panelists are currently working outside of academia. So I guess just any thoughts about postdocs or future careers outside of academia?
Yeah, I mean, I can happily talk about my experience. I'm still involved in academia. I don't know if you would say my postdoc was within academia because it was joint with an academic partner, but also the USGS, so a government agency within the US. So yeah, I guess, yeah, I don't, in terms of obtaining it, I think it's just kind of being aware of those types of positions. And I can't 100% say that I'm familiar with the situation in the US right now, but I think that within, outside of academia, like within Canada, those options, they're going to be partnerships. I think they're not going to be completely outside of academia because most researchers within the government structure in Canada anyways are working with academic partners. And if people are more interested, there's certainly funding agencies within Canada that facilitate those partnerships. But I think, yeah, none of them are strictly, I would say, here anyways, outside. And that was my experience in the US too. So.
Thanks, Kirsty. Brandon, do you have any insights on that? I know you currently work outside of academia.
Yeah. So it's not quite a postdoc. This is like a permanent position. But I will say it's more about throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. Not really who you know, at least not in my experience. I think I applied for maybe, I don't know, 100 or 125 jobs before I got this one, with maybe a half dozen interviews. So it really is more about the breadth of how much you're applying for and not kind of who you know. I know oftentimes in postdocs, it's like, oh yeah, like my postdoc advisor went to school with somebody else, and that's how we kind of met at a conference. In my experience, that wasn't how I got this job. It really was more just have a really good resume on one sheet of paper and kind of cross your fingers.
Thanks, that's good to know. Our next question that we'll go to is, what are the best kept secrets or advantages of doing a postdoc, in your opinion? Or just anything positive?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons. But like for me, it was the ability to do side projects. So during my PhD, I did a lot of teaching and a lot of like service around the university. Whereas with my postdoc, it was all research. And you realize that as far as doing one project, at least for me, I couldn't do that 40 hours a week. I'd go crazy. So it was nice to have like little things you can check off your box where I may only do the statistics for some other project and get something out of that. instead of having to have the entire project on my shoulders. So I felt like I had more time to like supplement other works because I wasn't so focused on just doing only mine.
I think one new thing about it, or different than graduate school, is there's some opportunities to apply for some larger amounts of money. So maybe you'll be collaborating with someone to write an NSF grant. You'll maybe be at more of a career stage to be doing that. And the AOS is an example of this. For example, the Kessel Award, which is more of an early career postdoc award, is larger than the student research grants. So I think you can start thinking about your research uh, with a larger amount of funding, and that is sort of helping you bridge to maybe becoming a faculty if you want to stay in academia.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could list. I would definitely agree with both Brandon and Rob, that like Robert, sorry, that there's lots of advantages to doing a postdoc. And for me, like some of the biggest ones were like, one, as you just mentioned, Robert, getting this opportunity to start developing your grant writing skills was a big one. You know, those are things that, you know, as you go out and look for a job, you can put on your resume, oh, I've applied for X grant or whatever. So that kind of stuff was really great. Also, one of the things that for me that was really valuable about doing a postdoc was it gave me the opportunity to start learning a little bit more about being a mentor, as opposed to being on the other side of it and being mentored all the time. It was kind of like, oh, now you're like going to be like mentoring these master's students and things. So that was a really good part. I enjoyed that part of my postdoc. And then of course, I think the biggest and probably most important is developing a broader network of researchers who you can collaborate with and stuff like that. Lots of advantages, I would say.
Thanks so much for your answers. Sort of on the flip side, our next question is related to some of the hardships that people have doing postdoc. So universities usually have much fewer postdocs compared to graduate students. Because of this, how do you find community at your institution as a postdoc? Or is this something you struggled with?
Yeah, I'll say for me, I happen to be lucky that there is a large postdoc community at my institution and within my department. Um, but I know that that's not the case in a lot of places. That wasn't the case where I went to graduate school. Uh, so we have postdoc like a postdoc committee. It doesn't really have a name. A postdoc networking committee that holds events for postdocs. Um, We try to do those monthly, and there's not really a lot to it. I think if your institution didn't have one of those things, that you could start it or petition the department to start something like that, something that holds events for postdocs, even if there's only a handful of postdocs in the department. And that just helps build some community. You don't have you don't have your graduate student cohort who you spent time in class with, who you achieved milestones with. So I think it is important to do that, and you might have to start that if it's not available. So.
Yeah, I can say I would say I actually did not have a postdoc community at all at the university I was at. Which, yeah, I would agree that I think it's a good thing to have, but in the absence of that, that community with the graduate students was, you know, not the same, but helpful. But I think, yeah, the idea of potentially starting something would be of value, because it was definitely one of those things where I was not quite a student, but also not, you know, a faculty. So I think often at our lab meetings, it was a bit weird. So yeah, I could definitely say that when that community is missing, I found myself just working a lot more with like collaborators, like the partners on the project who weren't even within the institution, rather than within the institution. I was mostly looking outside for that kind of sense of community. So that's another, I guess, alternative, is to find it elsewhere. But yeah, I think it does benefit people to work with other postdocs. So it's great that you had that.
Yeah, I think kind of what Kirsty just said, to sort of reach outside with other collaborators. And I would say also to try to do that in maybe not so official ways. So we had like researchers all across the Americas on this project that I did for my postdoc. And on like Fridays, sometimes we would get off work at 5 and just have a drink virtually over Zoom. So we talk about work. We'd also say like, how was surfing yesterday? Like, did you do anything fun over the weekend? And then those sorts of things, I think nobody really thinks like, oh yeah, that really helps my work. And not everything should have to help your work. But just to have those sort of unofficial things where it's like just having fun, ideas can come out of that all the time. So if you can't find something at university, it's totally okay. I mean, we have the internet now. I'm sure none of us are. I'm in Mexico, right? So like we can be close while being really far away, both in official and unofficial ways.
Thank you so much. I'd like to take a brief intermission because our final panelist has arrived. So Colleen, welcome to the webinar. If you'd like to take a chance to introduce yourself briefly, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the intermission. I'm so sorry I wasn't here at the beginning. There was a mix-up with time zones. I'm Colleen Miller, and I'm a postdoc at the University of Minnesota at the Institute on the Environment. I did my PhD at Cornell on the effects of light pollution on animal behavior and ecology. But now I am doing a lot of data science where I'm working at a global scale, trying to understand how land use changes and climate change are affecting pest communities and agriculture. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have for me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Our last question was related to finding community as a postdoc. So if you have anything to add to that, you're welcome to. The question was mainly based on the idea that often there's a bigger graduate student community than postdocs, so it might feel a bit isolating, but.
Yeah, this is something that I was really concerned about when I was looking for postdocs, and when I was deciding between the different options I had for postdocs, it was definitely a deciding factor because I came from a grad community that was really close and cohort based, and we were all very much in the same boat. And so it's something I really valued. And so because of that, I chose a postdoc position for many reasons, but in part because my position is within a cohort network. And so I joined the Institute on Environment with 9 other postdocs. We all sit in the same office together. And we don't necessarily work on the same projects, but we have each other to rely on. That's something I value. And then I immediately got to work in creating community through the different projects that I'm on, or creating new collaborative projects with people across the globe.
Thanks so much. Our next question is, what did you find to be the most difficult part about doing a postdoc, and how did you sort of overcome that challenge?
Man, I don't know where to begin on that one. I mean, there's like the logistical side of it. For me, things like moving, that was a big one. It was an international move, visas, permits, all that kind of stuff. But then there's, I guess, this sort of academic, more, not logistics, but I guess just sort of the academic types of challenges of like developing a program and getting to know developing a working relationship with somebody who is not your PhD advisor anymore. They're your boss, but might have a different idea about a project. Or I think for me, one of the most difficult things was just navigating new relationships and sort of figuring out how to work those. As well as like, the stress that I think probably everybody here will agree with, of just like what comes next. That was a big part. And then of course, like balancing the time of like getting your PhD papers out, finishing your postdoc, and looking for, there's a lot of time management involved, like a lot of balancing acts. So that was a bit of a struggle for sure.
I think for me, and this is kind of one of the reasons why I sort of left the academic side of things now, is that it always felt like there was more to do. So like I'm very much the kind of person that's like, I like to wake up early, get all my stuff done, and then have the rest of my day to sort of do what I'd like. So like a checklist that I just like to go through. And then you sort of realize, at least in my postdoc, that your checklist just goes on forever because you cross off one thing and add 2 more. And that was just a lot of a lot of anxiety from me that I felt was sort of taking me away from the stuff that I really enjoyed. So like I love to go birding, right? Like I love to go out there and see things. I saw a tiger heron yesterday. It was super exciting. But then I realized throughout my postdoc that I was going birding less. And it's like, well, for me, it was like I keep adding to this list of things I must do for work. And I'm taking away the stuff that like I used to do during my PhD of go birding just for fun. So, and like that's just for me. Obviously, people do a really good job. My postdoctoral advisor, Corey Richard-Zawacki, like she was great at that. She could do both, and she had a really good handle on it. That was one of those things that just like I never could figure out myself. So if you figure it out, go for it. But if not, you know, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I really like what Brandon just said because I think one of the best things about being a postdoc is you can, I mean, it depends on your situation, but you can kind of feel like the world is at your feet. You're done with your dissertation. You can really explore like a lot of different things. You can start writing grants yourself or co-writing grants yourself. Um, you have like entered into this new like level of respect from your peers in some situations. But also then you start saying yes to everything and then it slowly like piles up. And it's really exciting, but I've had a lot of hard conversations with myself about saying no. And I'm still on a no saying journey, I would say. But it's, you know, it's again that double-edged sword that I kind of started talking about where like you can do so many things and it's so exciting. Um, but you have to learn how to like cut back on things because people will ask you to do things because they see you as this like really awesome talented individual that can like get stuff done. Postdocs are known for like getting things done for people, but at the end of the day you need to take care of yourself too.
Was the question disadvantages, Kristen? Was that or
Just
or
difficulties.
difficulties? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I agree with what everybody's saying. I'm thinking about it in my own life. Um, but also, you go from a point of being maybe the most senior or a senior graduate student in your program that you've been at. You've been studying all these years to get to this point, and you're a real expert in your dissertation that you've put together. And then one thing that's good about a postdoc, though, is you can move into a different area that you don't know about and expand your skill set and get a new set of skills like that. But then that takes you down to being to no longer being the expert anymore in that new set of skills. So that's just another transition to think about, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much for your perspectives on that question. Next, we will transition to a different sort of topic. So what resources did you find most useful for finding postdoc positions or applying for funding for postdocs? And this can apply to both the US and Canada or international as well, as if any of you have any experience with that.
Well, I think for me, kind of like what Brandon was mentioning earlier, it was just a kind of matter of like, as like the specific resources were very broad. It was just a matter of like everything that would be coming your way. I think these are probably, I'm guessing, fairly similar to a lot of the resources that are just used in general to communicate like graduate student positions. You know, the networks and listservs. And honestly, the postdoc that I ended up getting, I found out about just by word of mouth through colleagues. So, you know, really, but I also, like Brandon as well, talked to like many people before that position sort of popped up. So I'd say starting early and talking to lots of people. That's been my experience anyways. I'm sure there's more formalized resources, but I would say just like everything else, it's really advantageous to use your networks and just start talking to people.
And another thing you could consider is, especially if your research can be moved from different places, is to find collaborators that are outside of the United States. We have a few projects that the funding only is allowed in Germany or it's only allowed in Panama. So that you could have a collaborator there, do the work with them, but then they could be the ones that like sort of head it a bit, and you could sort of capitalize on the network that you've created. So you can even be creative going outside of the US, as long as you have those connections, and don't mind sharing a little bit.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, there is one particular program that I know of in Canada for postdocs where, well, there's a couple, like things like, well, I know in the US there's NSF, like if you have ideas for your own postdoc where you can get the funding first and go after it, and there's certainly a few of those in Canada as well. Yeah, so if people are interested in specific details about those kinds of things, but I know like there is, like in Canada, we have something called NSERC funding. It's very similar to NSF, where if you have an idea for a postdoc project, you can basically get the funding and then shop it around to whatever advisor you want, which is another great approach to go.
Yeah, I would say with those those external fellowships are great. Obviously, I was mentioning the NSF postdoc fellowship earlier, and then the NSERC, and I don't know if they still have the Banting in Canada is another one. The NSF one is only for citizens or permanent residents in the U.S., but then there's some international fellowships as well. Mary Curie is one that I know a lot of people are interested in. But even if you get one that is research that you came up with and is your own, pretty much all of these are going to ask for a sponsor statement, and you're going to want to have a mentor set up who can also help you in this big task of writing an external fellowship. So whichever way you go about it, the networking is always still important.
Yeah, thank you so much for your insight on that. Our next question is a bit of a specific situation, but it seems like something people may come into contact with. So if a better postdoc offer comes up after you've already accepted another position, how would you recommend handling the situation? Is it acceptable to switch, and how would you navigate this ethically and professionally?
So I had two offers that came through right about the same time. One that I accepted first was the postdoc I did at Pitt, and then another one studying birds somewhere else. At the moment, I thought like, oh man, like I would have loved to like stay here and do this thing. But the postdoc that I went with actually worked out really well. So I will say that although up front this postdoc may look better than this one, you can never be entirely sure about the trajectory you're going to go through. So I would say be open-minded to the one that you go with. I ended up not switching. I think it really does depend on the situation you're in. I mean, if you do decide to switch and go from the first one to the second one, and your first advisor is very angry about that, then maybe it was okay that you didn't stay with them, because if they were angry about that, that could be a sign for some other things. But I would say, even if something does look better, to kind of be open-minded to something that's like different that may not be as good. Obviously, if it's like completely better, like one's fully funded and one has no money, then I think you can use your head on that one. But yeah.
Yeah, I think if you've accepted a job offer and then you go back and decide not to take that job offer, you need to be prepared for bridges to have been burned, because the fallout of doing something like that would be pretty intense. I think for a PI, they'd have to restart the HR process and the job search and a lot of things. And so if you get as far as to accept a job offer in writing and sign that letter, changing your mind is a big deal, I would say. And if the other panelists want to disagree with me, please do. But I think that's why it's important to really weigh your choices prior to signing that piece of paper, because just like any other job, if you renege after having accepted a position, um, it may have some fallout in terms of your relationship with those people.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. It's great to hear everyone's insight on that. So we have time for one or two more questions before we start going into live questions from the audience. So next, this is something that I know a couple of you have touched on already, but How can you best leverage a postdoc to acquire new skills while still being hired because of the skills you already have?
Well, I would say based on my experiences anyways, that would kind of come in the stage of selecting the postdoc maybe. And this is maybe something we haven't really brought up yet, but really talking to people who work with the PI, finding out more about their research program, maybe speaking to some of their students or if they have existing postdocs. But yeah, like I'd say getting new skills is going to be just kind of like, I think it's a matter of your own personal motivation to look for those and to sort of know what skills are being expected of you. Like if you want to develop new skills, then I would suggest you're not going to be wanting to look for a postdoc that does exactly what, keeps you in that same position of being an expert in your field, but not moving outside of it. So I guess one just general sort of strategy is to not feel too uncomfortable about expanding a little bit.
I mean, this is something I definitely did for my postdoc because I'm now doing work that's almost completely different from what I was doing as a PhD student. During my PhD, I was doing basic biology in an EEB department, and I was really wildlife focused. But now I'm working in an interdisciplinary setting that's very applied. And a lot of the work that I do is data science, and some of my closest collaborators are economists now. Totally different work. But the skills that I leverage were my data science skills, my expertise in ecology and basic biology, and a willingness to collaborate that I learned from my PhD, a lot of soft skills as well. And so I think if you're uncertain about whether you have the ability to make a switch into something that's different, that's interesting to you, sitting down with yourself and like thinking through what the actual skills and areas of expertise you have are, because it's probably a lot broader than you think it is. It's going to be definitely way broader than your dissertation title. And so yeah, I think that's a way to look at it, where for the position that I'm in currently, they were interested in someone who was an ecologist, and someone who had data science skills and like knew how to use R and things like that. And then they were willing to work with someone to get them up to speed on how this interacts with other disciplines.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that you can also like expand your skill set without completely leaving behind your PhD too. Like maybe you work in a system and you've been focusing on the behavior or the ecology of this species. That's your dissertation work, and then there's some like hormone physiology questions you can ask in the system, and then you know the system, you know this bird or whatever animal's behavior, and you can bring that knowledge into a lab that maybe is like more physiology oriented. So now you're bringing in a skill set that you had, and you're being exposed to something new too. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So we are now at the portion of the webinar that we're going to switch to having live questions from the audience. So if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask the panelists, please do send those in the chat and then we can ask them. I'll wait a couple more seconds. We also have more pre-submitted questions that we can continue answering if no one has live questions at the moment.
I think Liviani may also be raising their hand.
Oh, I cannot see that. If you're raising your hand, I cannot see it. I'm sorry. So please do send it in the chat.
Here I am.
Oh, sorry, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe they already mentioned this, but I didn't hear. It's about how they apply if they think that there is something that is like really a key for applying to a postdoc and being accepted. What they think that make them like being selected for that position.
I think for me, going into the project, so normally these things will be posted and you'll be able to read all through the project and there'll be questions you can read up on what the advisors are doing before. If you can come in with something they've never considered before, that can be really helpful. So I think for me, this chytrid fungus grows on frogs. You can't really tell if it has the fungus or not. So one of the things that I brought to the interview was that we came up with this new method to use CRISPR to detect the DNA directly in the field. So you don't have to have a qPCR machine, nothing like that. We hadn't developed it yet, but I had the idea. So I brought the idea. I was like, this is something that would be interesting. And I talked to the advisors who were on the interview later, and they're like, that was one of the big things, is that you came in with this new idea that was already applicable that we hadn't considered yet. So if you can already come in and contribute prior to starting, like that's pretty good that you've done your homework and that you have something up front.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of other questions now. So a question from Jacob in the chat. Are there any major green or red flags to be aware of in the interview process?
I could just, again, this is my experience, and it was something when I interviewed that my PhD advisors suggested to me that it was a red flag, and I ignored him, and he was right. It was a red flag, but I mean, making lemons out of lemonade out of lemons. But I think one of the things I was warned about was like, your postdoc is meant to be an opportunity to really ramp up your publications. Like generally the role of a postdoc is to produce publications. And the red flag for me during the interview was that this was essentially a field-based position. So I often make a joke that it was less like a postdoc and more like a second PhD, which wasn't terrible, but I would just sort of say, be aware of those kinds of things. Like if your goal is to really get your publications up and the position doesn't look like it's got you like developing protocols, implementing protocols and collecting data, then that might be just something to consider, that what you get out of that position might not be exactly in line with what you were hoping for. Again, you know, you kind of make do the best you can with what you have, and managed to get a few publications out of the process. But that was one of the things that my PhD advisor said to me, was like, as a postdoc, you shouldn't be going into a project where you're collecting data. That was his opinion. So for what that's worth.
I think, you know, this question, the answer probably depends on what green and red flags are for you, like what you are looking for from your postdoc. But I think it says more about like the importance of the interview process, and that it's important for you to be asking questions along the way, as it's important for them. You should be interviewing the person that you're considering working with just as much. And so when I've interviewed with people, I tend to grill them as well as the person who's being considered for the job. And so like if I really value work-life balance, I'll ask them directly about it. And if they can't provide a direct answer, or they walk around that question, it's a red flag for me, because they're not comfortable talking about whatever topic it is that I brought up. And so I think being able to read people who are trying to cover something up is important, so that when you ask those tough questions in an interview, you can pick it up.
Yeah, sometimes it's really hard on a short interview, but to understand what the lab culture is, how current members are doing there, and how former members are doing, where former members, maybe it's not part of the interview, but they could be a valuable resource. and to just check on that, see if there's a way that you can feel like you're getting a trustworthy opinion about it.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that. That is, I would definitely worth talking to existing students and what others. Yeah, I would agree.
Thank you so much. We will move on to another question in the chat. So this one's from Lauren. So she's asking about choosing to do a postdoc versus going straight into academia, if anyone has any insight on that.
Yeah, when I was still interested in the academic track, I knew I wanted to have like a research program that I could, kind of make like a larger one. So have a few grad students, maybe a postdoc, and undergraduates as well. And I feel like going right from a PhD into that is very unlikely unless you had like an absolutely incredible PhD. But so I knew that if I wanted to have that, you'd have to have a postdoc to get those publications that you needed. Otherwise, you just couldn't have enough to show that you're able to do that at the next level. And if you didn't, if you wouldn't have done that, it would have been a more teaching role. Teaching is great, and that's what you love. It's just that the opportunity, the areas where you can do that, and then the pay that comes with that can be difficult for people if you don't go to do that postdoc at the larger universities.
Thank you, Brandon. Another question in the chat from Sunny. So this is another kind of specific situation, but does anyone have insight on what would happen if you got another job offer during your postdoc? Can you terminate the postdoc and switch to the job offer before the end date of the postdoc?
I think absolutely. The postdocs are contract temporary positions, and the point of them is that they're not forever. This is something, if you're concerned about it, you should talk to the PI while you're going through the hiring process to make sure that it's acceptable for you to terminate early. But a lot of people, as soon as they start their postdoc, they start looking for other positions because the postdoc is for 1 to 5 years. It's a short period of time. And so it's expected that you're on the market and that you're looking for other jobs that are longer term. So, I mean, maybe some people, they hire a postdoc and they really want them to finish whatever it is that they started. And so it's up to you ethically with what you're okay with in terms of terminating a position early or not. But yeah, absolutely be looking for new jobs, accept what comes your way too.
Yeah, and just being on the other side of it right now, I would fully anticipate that postdocs are looking for work and would be quite happy and excited for them if they found something permanent while they were working on a project, again with the importance of open communication and everything and being honest and upfront. But I think it's kind of goes with, it's part and parcel of the package to me of working with postdocs, is that yeah, they get a lot done in a short amount of time. But you never expect that they're going to be there forever. So I would say, yeah, as long as you're honest and upfront about everything, it's good.
Yeah, and I think the rules for like changing are sort of the same as if you would change any other job. Try to give your advisor, enough time to at least have a plan in place. I think I was maybe gave 3 weeks or a month whenever I did it. So enough time to say like, and I still even work with the group now to like finish up some things like on the side, because it ended well. It may not always be that way, but yeah, I mean, you still want to be respectful of their time as well.
Yeah, before we were just commenting on that particular situation because that person writing had apparently just accepted an offer and was moving on. But in this question, it sounds like you're there at the postdoc. Now you get a job offer, which you're saying is permanent faculty, industry, etc. That's totally appropriate, I would think, from a reasonable advisor.
Okay, thank you so much. This leads into leads well into another question in the chat from Jack. So during the postdoc, how much time did you spend looking for or applying for your next position?
Too much.
A lot.
Yeah, I guess for me, like I got I started in February and I had an interview for the next position. I had like a faculty position maybe 4 months later. So you should always sort of be ready for the next thing because postdocs are just a temporary deal. So you don't really want to waste time. If somebody else thinks that you're prepared for that full-time position, then you probably are. So I'd say as soon as possible, but like don't do it 40 hours a week because you still have a job that you're being paid to do.
One of the faculty I worked with during my postdoc had this great expression, and he was like, he just grumbled about postdocs all the times, but he was like, all you guys ever do is look for work and publish your PhD papers. I was like, of course. What else am I supposed to do? Yeah, I spent a lot of time looking for work.
I would say like I had to learn, as I mentioned in some of the other answers, I had to learn these new methods and stuff. And while I was, I'm still learning, but while I was still definitely trying to accomplish some methods that I wanted to learn and have down first. This is very on the very initial part of my postdoc, like first 6 months, 9 months. At that point, I was more focused on getting that done. Uh, but obviously that has changed now in terms of looking for other positions.
Yeah, thank you so much. So switching gears a bit, we have a question asking if there are opportunities for industrial postdocs in natural science in the US. So it might be helpful to get a clarification on this. I'm not sure if the person means postdocs in industry, but if anyone has any insight on that.
I don't know if, and maybe they are called postdocs, but other things you can look for, words like internship, things like that, that might give you the same sort of experience under a different name. Though I don't know if they may differ, but I know the company where I work, that we do internships to bring people in for a little bit of time so they can get the experience. They're typically shorter, maybe 6 months to a year. But if you're really just trying to get a specific kind of experience, that may be all the time you need. Because you're just trying to get the experience, not 3 years worth of papers, if industry is going to be your final landing place.
Yeah, I think the term postdoc is a pretty academic term. And so while you can see postdocs that are in collaboration with like different NGOs like the TNC or something like that, or USGS, if they're in collaboration with the federal level, there's often a university involved in that process, not always. And so if you're interested in going into industry and you still also want to do a postdoc, maybe it would make sense to look for some kind of collaboration like that, where the lab you're interested in is also collaborating heavily with like the R&D department of some company.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your insight on that. Our next question, how much time did you spend working to get your postdoc position? So I assume this means applying, searching job boards, looking for positions.
I spent a ton of time looking for postdocs. My final year of my PhD, I spent some of it writing my dissertation for sure. But I spent a lot of time looking for the next position. I think I started in like June of the year before I finished and then continued on. And so yeah, it takes a ton of time because it's really competitive market depending on your subspecialty. But obviously it's worth it.
Yeah, the best part of getting a job was finally saying, oh my goodness, I don't have to look for a job anymore. It's like through the PhD. Yeah, it was a lot similar to you, Colleen. I spent a good amount of time, most of the last year of my PhD.
Yeah, I can just chime in. If you go this NSF postdoc in biology route, I recommend leaving after you've identified a mentor, maybe at 3 to 4 months. Really spent many days on this, hours of Zoom calls with my future mentor. And then it took maybe 2 or 3 hours just to submit it. I remember that. So into the system. So yeah, definitely leave a lot of time.
Thanks everyone for your answers. Our next question from David, are there specific choices that might change if you're hoping for a non-academic track with state or federal government instead of faculty positions at a university?
Yeah, if you want to do a postdoc, but you want to go into a non-academic track, there's a lot of different options. There are like PRF similar programs where you find funding through the USGS or whatever federal agency you're interested in, and then you find a mentor who's interested in your work, or the flip side, maybe they propose the project and you're interested in it. And so you can look for positions like that. One of the reasons I chose the postdoc I'm at right now is that they have a lot of different kinds of collaborations, including a collaboration with the Midwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, which is a USGS offshoot, and it's in-house at the university where I'm at, in addition to agencies from like the Forest Service, USDA offices, people like that. And so look at who they're collaborating with, but there's also specific programs for if you're interested in doing postdoc as federal. And I would recommend looking at the Pathways website, might be a good start. And you can look at things like the ORISE Fellowship, which I'll put in the chat so you know how to spell it.
Thanks, Colleen. We have time for a couple more questions before the end of our webinar. So we have one in the chat asking, when joining a lab as a postdoc, do you think it's a good idea to contact other lab members beforehand?
I'd say
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Robert.
No, you could go ahead. I was gonna say.
I'd say yes, but then also recognize that the lab members also talk to the PI too. So if you can ask questions, that's great. Try to get more information. I recognize if you ask a question that may not be the best question, I don't know what that might be, that it could pop up the chain as well. So if you say like, oh yeah, I want to go on vacation for 3 months every year, that might get back to the PI, and PI be like, well, if you want to go on vacation for 3 months, then we're probably not going to hire you because we can't support that. So just recognize that you might always be on the clock if you're asking questions about things. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask them, just to be cognizant of that.
Thank you, Brandon. So we have a few more minutes. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'll ask one of our pre-submitted questions, and I think this will be all we have time for today. So let me pull up another question we got ahead of time. So this question is related to people who may want to stay in academia. So often you need to do multiple postdocs before attaining a position as a faculty member. So in this case, how do you maintain interest in research and avoid burnout? Or also, if people just have advice for avoiding burnout in general, I'm sure that would be helpful for everyone here.
Well, if you figure it out, let me know. Still there. It's a life's process, I think, and multiple of the other, I think all of the other panelists have mentioned this already, that like identifying this work-life balance it's a process, but it's important and definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, I saw this question. I don't have a good answer because I'm not sure I could handle a second postdoc. I think this is it for me. Because by the time you're in your second postdoc, you gotta think of how many years you've been studying to get to the point of being a second in your second postdoc. You're surely in your 30s, maybe you have a family at this point, and now you're getting up, and even if you don't, you're getting yourself up now at this age and rerouting yourself, and maybe you don't know if that will be the last postdoc. So, not to dig the hole deeper for this question rather than getting us out of it, but yeah, I don't know if it's for me. So.
And now that we're kind of at the end of time, there's one thing that I do want to share because I am outside of the academic postdoc research. I don't work with birds anymore. I work with big data on clinical trials. But one thing that I'm glad that worked out for me, it's kind of just a realistic thing of the market. Not everybody is going to get a job. There aren't that many faculty positions. It's not it's just selection. Darwin told us so long ago. So also invest in the skills that you can transfer somewhere else. I did a lot of DNA sequencing. I did a lot of R and data analysis, and having that skill whenever all the jobs weren't coming to me was really, really nice. I would say go for it. I went for the academic position and I went for it 110%. And I was very, very happy that something else was there afterwards. And don't think that you have to pick one or the other. I think what Colleen, you were saying that you do big data stuff. So you work with big data. So you can do that in a bird specific way and take it out and work with economists later. So I would say just make sure that you don't put all the effort into your project to make your project great. Make sure that whatever you're doing also makes you great so that you're marketable for a faculty position, for an industry position, for whatever you want to do later down the road. This is about growing you. So make sure that you are the one who's also growing, not just your work.
Love that, Brandon. Yeah, I at the end of my PhD, I was super burnt out. And so I really took stock of everything. And I think I mean, it's personal for everyone because it's a result of a lot of mental health struggles that people experience in academia, in intense positions generally. It's not just us. Um, but I think it can often result from a mismatch between the priorities of people around you and your actual priorities for yourself, which I think Brandon was getting at a little bit. And so, what do you actually care about? Why are you in research, or why are you in science? Does that match the job you're actually doing? And if it doesn't, how can you make those changes? And just starting small with like, okay, I'm just overwhelmed with all these tasks. Sorry about this, like light. Um, and like, going through like, okay, how can I get through this period of time, this 6 months? And then start making a plan for how you're actually going to change your relationship with your work moving forward. And I mean, it's a really intense, really long process to get out of burnout for some people because it's an intense place to be. And so, yeah, thinking about like, if you don't want to be postdocing a lot, like some people love it, some people hate the transient lifestyle. Have that conversation with yourself. Ask yourself what you actually want, and what is worth it too.
100% agree with that. And on top of that, sort of being patient with yourself, I think, as well. One of the sort of most insightful things I think that somebody said to me at one point when I was battling with this whole burnout issue was, you can have it all, but not at the same time. So taking your time to kind of, not feel like you have to have everything figured out all at once and the perfect position and the perfect this, and it's a process. So that was, this, like I say, it's a process of learning how to avoid burnout. But I think that idea that, yeah, we don't need to do it all right this minute is something that's helpful to keep in mind if you can.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kirsty. I think this is a nice inspirational note to end on. We're just about out of time, and hopefully these ending reflections help all of us as we think about what we want to do next in our career path, whether it's a postdoc or not. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar and got to learn something. And thank you for all of the perspectives of the panelists. sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a second. But so yes, this webinar is being recorded and it will be processed and then uploaded to the AOS website. So you can also look out for the link in your email inbox soon. So we are going to wrap up now. Thanks again to our panelists and for everyone joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us. This was great.
Yeah, thanks for the
Thanks,
invite.
everyone.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Bye.